Our lecture this afternoon is Perfect Love. Love itself is supposed to be perfect, so someone might think that it was superfluous to put the word perfect before love. But the Bible states that perfect love casts out fear, which leads me to believe that the writer is definitely trying to make clear to our consciousness the nature of love. That love is many things to many people. We have filial love. We have the love of children for their parents, and we have the love of parents for their children. We have romantic love, the love of a man for a woman or a woman for a man. We have self-love, the love of ourselves for the things that we like to enjoy, the things that we like. And self-love is very active in this world today. Many years ago, I was obsessed with the idea that self-love was all wrong and that it should be killed, and that the love of God should be substituted for it. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I'm going to repudiate that statement, but I certainly would modify it. I think that self-love is necessary to a point until we have replaced it with divine love. But I think that there are degrees of self-love, as there are degrees of all kinds of love. I think love is always modified by the degrees of our devotion for the type of love we wish to manifest. If we wish to manifest love for our neighbor, this is, of course, not self-love, it's a social love. We love society, we love people. But much of love seems to be the result of the feeling that we get out of it. In other words, we desire to love because it makes us happy to love. A long time ago, when people were, and they still are, giving large donations to churches, a woman decided after she'd given several $1,000s to the church that she was going to ask it back. That wasn't us. So she asked it back. They wouldn't give it to her. So she got a lawyer and she sued the church. And when the lawsuit was filed, the jury was drawn, case was held, and the decision was handed down. And this is what the court said. They said, in the matter of eleemosynary gifts, we hold that the gifts are given and the benefits are given more to the donor than to the donee. And so the legal mind and the mind of jurisprudence decided that there were more blessings in giving than in receiving, thus confirming the Scriptures. So we see there is a type of love that actually enjoys the fact that it can love. And in a way, this is related to the self. Some people, of course, will hold that any time we receive a benefit, that this makes it selfish love. I don't think this is completely true at all. But I think that we always have to watch the degrees and the motives behind whatever we do. If we have expectations of return and we give only because we expect return, it may well be that we are selfishly motivated. Therefore, when we start to ponder the nature of perfect love, we must realize that perfect love is the real love of God. Because, as I see it, God does not seem to derive any great specific benefit out of all that he does for mankind. I think that his is the most unselfish love of all. He takes his energy, his creative mind, and everything that he has and is, and he gives it to human beings to work with. And in return, he is reviled, cursed, denied, mocked, and scoffed at. He is despised and rejected of men. And in the God is dead theory that recently has been popularized by some of our theologians, we find the proof of the fact that the Creator is not really thanked for all that he has done for man. Now, I think sometimes when I really meditate on this, that the reason he is not thanked is because we have not yet really appropriated his intentions. We have misappropriated his intentions. The great givingness of God does not seem to be properly rewarded, and I think that this is because man is yet in his infancy, and that perfect love has not actually done her perfect work because we have hindered the perfect work of God by our ignorance, our unbelief, and our acceptance of mortal fallacy. Human fallibility is at fault, then, interfering with the progress God intends for the race. I think another problem involved here is the fact that we are always prone to condemn ourselves or condemn the Creator. When we really condemn ourselves, we are in one sense condemning the Creator too. And yet, where does the fault lie? We cannot actually go to the Godhead and say, well, Father, you made the world such a lousy world that we can't get anything out of it. That wouldn't be true at all, would it? On the other hand, we can't begin to besmirch ourselves as the handiwork of God too much, or we're really desecrating the divine intent there too. So we walk a razor's edge, in a way. And I think that perhaps at times, and I really think this, that blame and condemnation are perhaps the greatest impediment in the world, and the greatest cause of the perfect love of God not manifesting. In other words, I am trying to say to you today that if we would stop condemning ourselves, stop condemning God, stop condemning the universe, stop condemning our job, our teachers, our government, and stop condemning in general, just stop it completely, and recognize that we are living in a glorious opportunity. And then ask ourselves just what this opportunity is, that we could well answer it and say, well, the opportunity is to express perfect love. Well, if we would start doing it instead of just talking about it, I am convinced that we could make our lives, our government, our job, our church, our home, our school, and even nature a place for the expression of perfect love, because it would begin to express first in ourselves. Most reactions that occur in the world that bring about resistance movements and rebellion are the result of fear. People are afraid, and in their fear they lash out at the nearest object of their disaffection. So in psychology, we learn, too, that paranoia and even schizophrenia is really the result of traumatic fear, dominant fear, fear that becomes obsessive to the point that something has to give. And usually what gives is the mind. The mind divides itself in two because that's the way it can deceive itself. When it divides itself in two, one part of the mind says, now, I have to acknowledge this, and the other part says I won't acknowledge it. This is a dichotomy. A tragic happening occurred in a trip from the East Coast by a lady and her husband. They had some children too. And they were driving along. She was at the wheel and her husband was asleep in the back seat when the car crashed head-on and she was killed. The children were alive and uninjured in the car, and he was in the back seat without his shoes. When the ambulance came, the police, he got out of the car and they found him wandering around in circles. And what did he say? He said, "If I could only find my shoes, everything would be all right." If I could just find my shoes, he kept repeating, then everything would be all right, over and over and over again. Because the mind that knew that his wife was dead and the tragedy went to sleep. And the other mind, the false mind, come out and told him that if he could only find his shoes, everything would be all right. And this is a little bit illustrative of the dual mind and how it sets up a split pattern. Several years ago, one of the people that we had at our headquarters that subsequently left, being unfit for cosmic service, on Monday gave me a check for $1,000. And on Friday betrayed me. I asked St. Germain why. St. Germain said, "You are dealing with a split personality. This woman, when she was very young, had a romance. And as a result of what happened in that romance, she decided she would hate men and never marry. But down deep inside of her, she still had a yearning to marry and still liked men. So one side of her was attracted to men and the other side was absolutely in a state of despising men. The master told me that this dichotomy had never been healed. And one day, Dr. Jekyll would work in her, the Dr. Jekyll of the good little girl that was very, very good. And then on another day, the Mr. Hyde would come out from his hiding place, and he would act. And so this unfortunate state of circumstances existed to plague this poor woman. And had I never had the instructions of the Master, I would have remained probably to my dying or ascending day in a state of confusion about why in the world she would give me $1,000 one day and turn around and betray me another day. The personal aspects of this are of no concern of anyone's. I only cited it as an example. So, we then come face to face with the idea of self-condemnation in a matter of perfect love. We have mentioned condemnation of others. Some people justify self-condemnation on the grounds that they deserve to condemn themselves. We hold that no one deserves to condemn themselves because self-condemnation is equally undesirable with condemnation of others. It is unprofitable. But we wish to say that the discriminating Christ mind always knows when we err. And it is not wrong for us as divine seekers to recognize when we make a mistake. There's a difference in recognizing we've made a mistake and condemning ourselves. Some people go so far out on this no condemnation bit and this speaking evil of no one, they want to become like the three monkeys. See no evil, hear no evil, and think no evil. This does not mean what most people think, and I want to make this very clear. In the matter of perfect love, if love is to attain the majority of its perfection, it has to have the quality of Christ's discrimination. And it must be able to recognize the mistakes of itself as well as the mistakes of others. And there is no problem in this as long as we do not reach into the area of condemnation. However, if I were to be asked or consulted on this whole matter, I would say that I would think that people could have more discrimination towards themselves and less toward others, and they would be better off. In other words, I think minding our own business in the lives of others is very important. I think that unless we're consulted or asked, we should let people paddle their own canoes, with the exception of those who are teachers and are specifically ordained to bring forth truth. These people are supposed to do it. But the average person today is not supposed to interfere in their neighbor's business by condemning him. I cannot object to praise. I have never seen anyone harmed by praise, providing the praise came from a sincere heart and was indexed by genuine appreciation. If people have appreciation and they tell other people about it, these plaudits are often spurs of great joy. They're joyous spurs. When people are told that they've done something nice or that someone appreciates them, and I don't care who it is, you tell your neighbor this, your friend you meet, you say you're glad to see them, these things generate a little oil that smoothens life's pathway. Now some people then come along and say, well, why should we just pass out the oil? If they deserve to be condemned, let's condemn them. I repeat, no one deserves to be condemned, for the simple reason that evil acts themselves are their own condemnation. People are quite wise until they start being foolish and deceiving themselves by tricking themselves with a double mind, where they try to tell themselves that it's not so. As one of our brothers and sisters in this group once told me, say it isn't so. Just saying something isn't so does not alter its structure at all. We cannot and ought not to be ostriches. We ought to be realists and see just what is going on in the world and in ourselves. But it's a real funny thing that people will see evil everywhere and condemn it and stub their toe over the littlest bit of good that's anywhere and not recognize it. This is also the nature of us all as people. But I want to emphasize this afternoon that I think that a very, very small percentage of the universe is bad. I think the majority of the people are good. Good in their intentions. Good in their resolves. Good in their concepts of destiny, what they would like to be. The yearnings of the soul, gilded as they are by the divine framework, sort of carry through the whole fabric of life. And I think that nature is good. And the stars, the sunset, sunrise, the sweetness of the scent of flowers, freshly mown hay, the babbling brook, singing birds, and the hopes of heaven. I think the world is, as Robert Louis Stevenson said, the world is full of a number of things. I think we should all be as happy as kings. But the difference between should be and are is two different things. I am convinced that most people in their despairs despair most about little things. Large, ominous ideas and illnesses and things like this, these sometimes come unawares on people, and they take these in stride much better than they do the little things that seem sometimes to threaten so much, but actually are often nothing more than boogeymen. Because there is a great deal of happiness in the world that shows that the perfect love of God is a leaven working in society. I've had conversations with Master Moria. He gave us quite a talk this morning. That talk was not intended to smash or blast your hopes, but to show you in a way that heaven is laughing at the ridiculous situations people put them in, because if heaven does not mock them, human beings might take these things seriously. And we are convinced that this age regardless of what happens to it, is going to pass into history. And we are convinced that if we don't get it now, ultimately this world is going to get her golden age. What we would like to see happen is have it happen now while we're here. You see, that's the whole thing. And I don't think we can blame ourselves for desiring to see that perfect love. After all, in one way, it's the stair steps of all the ages, and now we come to the landing place, you see. From the time of Christ, from the foundation of the world, mankind has tried to move toward a parliament of man from the standpoint of the divine idea. Certainly not from the idea of Nimrod, who builded a tower, the Tower of Babel. Not from the idea of one world, from the standpoint of these one-worlders who want to go ahead and just unite people together, like I was talking about tying the cat's tails together and throwing them over the clothesline. It's not a matter of union, it's a matter of unity. We want a one world, all right, and so do the masters. Moria pointed that out in his encyclical. But we don't want one world at any price. The reason we have different nations and different churches, different philosophies, is because they fit the needs of different people. Everyone isn't going to be able to accept our philosophy simply by reason of the fact that they are so much dyed by the dyed-in-the-wool concepts of orthodoxy that they're as good as dead. They won't change. They've made up their mind to it. They'll tell you this. And I think there's nothing worse in the world than to waste our time trying to change these dyed-in-the-wool people. There are an awful lot of people in the world, and many of them have no church, no philosophy, and no sense of direction. We get them every once in a while in fate ads. They write in. They don't even know that a Bible exists. Some of them have never heard of Christ. We are tutoring some of them in the things of Christ. And these are Americans. We have learned of people where the mother and father never mentioned God in the home, and they never knew anything about God. And it may come as a great surprise to you to know that Mrs. Crystal Anderson, who was our first secretary, scarcely knew the Bible and was raised more or less along the line of practically no religion. Crystal was always interested in our quotations of scriptures from the Bible because she herself had no training in the Bible. Many of our people are, of course, Christ-oriented from an early Christian home. And when they find the teachings of the Masters and understand how those teachings enable them to fit together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle the many mysteries of life, they are extremely grateful for it. And they should be. We all should be. For I think basically that perfect love has synthesized the many philosophies and religions into a complex whole that is very orderly and sweet. But I think the most important thing for all of us to have this afternoon is the understanding of how to acquire perfect love. And I fear that the acquisition of perfect love is related to the attention and to energy, both. If, as the Russians have now said, they have discovered that time is energy, and we can accept that, then we have to realize that the substance of our lives is made up of time, and time synonymous energy. So it isn't just what we do in the class here that counts, but it's what we do away from the class that counts. What we do here, of course, counts. But what we do here will become more transcendent and perfected in love if we are functioning when away from here as we are intended to function. And the perfect love of God will enable us to cast aside sophistry and wit and bring into manifestation the real Spirit of the Lord, the real Holy Ghost, the real breath of God in our lives. I think one of the problems that I faced myself in accepting this idea was the fact that I was of the opinion that perhaps the Holy Ghost was so holy that it would annihilate me. I thought that I would become full of holes, that God would shoot me full of holes, there wouldn't be anything left, and I was afraid I would lose my life by becoming too holy. And I'll just bet you, if some of you would admit it, you've had some of the same ideas. So you try to hold on to your life and you wind up losing it because what you're holding on to isn't anything that really is the same, has no constancy whatsoever. First, you find yourself drooling oatmeal all over your chin as a child. The next thing you know, they take the bib off and they say, no more bottle for you. Then you're walking around, then they send you to school. And then you get into the schoolyard, and the next thing you know, you're in high school, and the first thing you know, you're out on your own working at a job. And then you have a whole bunch of concepts, and when you get a little older, you change all those for some more concepts. So who are you anyway that you're trying to hang on to? You've let go of yourself many times already. What are you trying to hang on to? Some kind of a status quo? I think that's what most people do, though. They hang on to the status quo of the old man. He's old from the day he was born, and he's tired. And he dies tired. And the eternally new man is the man of the Spirit that recognizes that he has to be renewed in God every day and changed. We simply do have to change. We can't remain the same. And the proof of that is in the fact that George Lancaster back there in the corner, he was a bartender once. He don't mind me telling this on him at all. And I'm just as proud of him as Punch. He's one of our real devotees. But you see, the fact that he was a bartender made him to know a lot of people, and he loved people, and he understood people, and he always knew that the whole thing was phony. You can't even pour a drop of wine down him now. One time I was out for some kind of a lunch with him, and I asked him, I said, shall we have a little tiny sip, a thimbleful of wine? And he said, no, nothing doing. He said, I give it up. So I had to turn around and say, well, I'm going to follow your example, George. Which is a bit interesting, because this perfect love is practical and down to earth. You can use it in your daily life to improve your business, your understanding, and your friendships. I think many of us get too serious at times about our families and ourselves. We get too overly concerned. I'm not against anything that will help us. If worry will help us, fine, let's all worry together. Continuing on with this perfect love, I want to admit that all of us will do things and say things at times that may not always be agreeable to others. I mean, I've been a bull in a china closet in my life many times, but it has never been through intent. I have never tried to sit on anybody or hurt anybody. I've sometimes opened my mouth and put my foot in it. You know what I mean. But the thing is, you either have to be a man of action or a man of inaction. You can be so scared to live that you don't do anything. And I believe that perfect love casts out that fear. And I believe you have to run the risk of trying to serve God, of doing your best. And if you're going to head an organization like this, you're going to have to be unafraid to make statements. If you make a wrong statement, well, you just have to trust that people will understand that, you see. Because the lives of all of us have had many shames in it. If not in this life, then we've had it in the past. And there isn't any one of us that hasn't made a mistake. We haven't been on this planet this long without making some mistakes. But regardless of that, I think the apostles and the prophets and the great men, spiritually speaking, down through the ages, have been full of mistakes. I think they've made a lot of mistakes. But what would we have done without them, mistakes and all? What would we have done without them? I'll say it'd be dark ages. So we have to face the realistic view that we are moving onward to a perfection that we seek from whatever plateau we are presently on. I intend, God granting me the life, the long life to do it, and God granting me the wisdom to be able to understand how to do it, and God granting me the friends like you to help me do it, to see that that university develops a series of practical courses in many subjects that we hope will be written in a manner that most people can understand, that will enable people to put some of these practical, philosophical, religious, and even political and social ideas into the test tube of daily living, where you and I can learn to live, you see, a little better than we did the day before. I think that all schools and all classes and all instruction and the whole business here on this planet that we call life is all intended to improve the strain. I think there are retrogressive forces in the world. I think there are forces and things that we can do that will retrogress us as well as progress us. And I can cite several of them. I agree that LSD and all dangerous drugs can retrogress man, and I do not believe they will progress man. I believe they are retrogressive agents. I believe that beer, wine, and whiskey, taken to excess certainly, can retrogress man. Used moderately, very moderately, they may have a medicinal place. I know in Europe, the Europeans have a glass of beer and they feed their children wine like water, and the way they handle it, I can't say that I can find as much fault with them as the way we handle it here. I mean, they understand it. However, when you get to really know the truth about it all, you find that the creation of fermentive beverages was brought down here by the Luciferians originally. It was not an activity of God. That's why the proverb says that strong drink mocks, you see. However, I also believe that cigarettes and tobacco should be discarded if possible by the students, but as most of you know, I never condemn any of you who do smoke. I don't condemn anybody for anything. That's their business. But I still am going to take a stand and say that I think we'd all be better off without it. I think it is a retrogressive agent also in a minor way. Physically, I think it is a deteriorating agent, in many cases responsible for lymphatic diseases, emphysema, lung cancer, throat cancer, and also tuberculosis and heart trouble. So I think we'd be better off without it. I think sex is another act which, while it is very vital to the procreative world we live in, we have to keep creating, we have to keep having children or we'd all die out. We have to give life streams a chance to come in. I think excess sex used entirely for pleasure can raise people up to great heights of ecstasy in 1 minute and drop them down the next to in such a terrible state of confusion that they don't know whether they're coming or going. And I think that can be a retrogressive agent when it's abused. I think the love of a man and a woman, if they're disposed to be in love, can be a very beautiful experience, and they can be helpmeets to one another and do a lot of good for one another. And I think the celibate that wants to choose the celibate course can make his peace with God in the divine romance. And he can even, in many cases, he or she become attached to a spiritual being. And it will not be a sex activity, it will be a raising up of the sex energy to the head, where it becomes a sacred activity, because the word sex really is sex. It comes from sacerdotal and sacred. The sacroiliac. Sacroilium, huh? And I think all things are wrong only in their abuses. And so the perfect love that drains us of fear must take dominion over all of our acts and make them spiritually creative acts. We have to begin to do as God did. Perfect love will teach us how to create a perfect body. Great saints have had sicknesses. Don't think they haven't. Look at Ramakrishna. He died with cancer of the throat. There have been many crucifixions. St. Teresa had cancer on the knee, I believe. Great afflictions have come to great saints. But on the other hand, what I am citing for you this afternoon is the spiritual power of the creative divine mind in man that is able to create by perfect love the perfect body. And forgetting the karmic patterns that anybody may have, or the projected patterns of human hate that they may have projected against them, man left alone that will perform a creative act on his body can completely rejuvenate and regenerate his body by the Christ mind. Well, one of the most beneficial things to do is to regenerate the mind before you try to regenerate the body. Otherwise, you're almost doing like Jesus said, before you start putting wine into a bottle, you first get a new bottle. And the chalice of the consciousness, or the chalice of the mind, should be renewed so that the content will come in, the renewing content, and then the content can be imbibed by the soul, and one can start about the business of building a perfect body by the perfect mind. But you know who the bugaboo is? You know who the serpent in the trees is? The winding, sinuous emotions, the puny little ego that with the puny intellect that always opposes the Christ mind combines together, the puny intellect and the puny ego, and gets his feelings hurt because someone doesn't notice him. Right when somebody's trying to lead a spiritual life, right when somebody is trying to do their best to renew their mind, right when they're doing the best they can to renew their body, along comes the human ego and gets its feelings hurt. And then the ego, with its hurt feelings, starts to generate the emotional whirl in the solar plexus. And that's like a spinning top. And it just pulls the mind and the whole being, the body and all, into a drain. Only it's a reverse spiral. You're going right down the drain. You understand what I mean? Why, it just seems as though the world's literally going to fall apart if you get your feelings hurt. And what is the cure? I think the cure is Christ understanding, providing you can vigilantly see that Christ understanding is given voice at the time you need Christ understanding, to stand up here and say when the boat starts to rock and the storm of the emotions comes up, peace, be still, and know that I am God. If we would only do that, we wouldn't be disturbed by other people. When the boat starts to rock, right away seize it. Don't wait. Don't wait until you're all stirred up and then try to control it, because then you've got a demon on your hands and it'll be stronger than you are.